It started as a lingering doubt, small enough to brush off, but annoying like a loose thread on an otherwise perfectly stitched suit. I remember the exact moment it planted itself in my mind. It was after a long day at work. I came home, tired but happy, expecting the usual warm greeting from Jenny and my stepson, Ethan. Only that day, the house was oddly quiet. I walked into the kitchen, still in my work clothes, and found Jenny staring intently at her phone. She didn't notice me at first, and I saw her smile, a secretive, mischievous smile I hadn't seen from her in years. When she finally looked up, she gave a start, quickly flipping her phone face down. "Hey, babe!" she said too brightly. Her tone had a forced enthusiasm that grated against me. "Hey," I replied, my voice trailing. I wanted to ask her what she'd been looking at, but it felt awkward. We'd never been the type to snoop in each other's lives. We were happy, or at least I thought we were. The thought was gone as quickly as it came. I kissed her cheek and joined her in the kitchen, joking about the surprise dinner I could smell in the oven. For a moment, it was like any other night, and I told myself it was all in my head. Then, just as I was relaxing, I heard the ding of her phone. She picked it up immediately, her smile vanishing as she read the message. Jenny glanced at me, then back at her phone, fingers moving rapidly as she typed out a reply. "What's that about?" I asked, forcing a light tone. "Oh, just a friend from work," she said quickly, waving it off. But she was still tapping her phone furiously, her focus entirely on whatever she was writing. She put the phone down only when Ethan walked in from the back door. "Hey, Ethan!" I said with a smile, but he barely nodded in response. He seemed distracted. At first I didn't think much of it. He was a teenager, after all. But that night, I noticed he kept glancing at his phone, almost mirroring Jenny's actions. The two of them exchanged a look across the table during dinner, a look that was just a bit too knowing, too secretive. My stomach tightened. "Relax," I told myself. "You're overthinking." The next day, though, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but my mind kept wandering back to that shared look, to Jenny's quick reflex to hide her messages. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling as thoughts I didn't want to consider ran through my mind. I was proud of the family Jenny and I had built, of the bond I'd worked to create with Ethan. The kid had been through a lot with his biological father out of the picture, and I tried my best to be a stable figure in his life. We weren't close, but I believed we had a quiet understanding, a mutual respect. I'd even started to think of him as my own. The next day at work, I couldn't concentrate. My thoughts kept drifting to Jenny's smile, the secretive look in her eyes. Around midday, a coworker made a comment that startled me. "Hey, Tom, I saw your wife at Miller's Diner yesterday around lunchtime. She was with her son, right?" Yeah," I stammered, though I hadn't known they were out together. Did she say anything?" The coworker shrugged. "Not really. They just looked, I don't know. Busy, I guess." He chuckled, clearly unaware of the effect his words had on me. He waved and walked off, leaving me frozen at my desk. Why hadn't Jenny mentioned it? I told myself it was nothing. They were just out together, maybe running errands. But when I got home that night, I couldn't help noticing the same strange vibe in the house. Jenny was glued to her phone again, and Ethan seemed lost in his own world, occasionally exchanging those same, cryptic glances with her. Finally, late that evening, Jenny left her phone on the coffee table. I told myself not to be paranoid, that it was a breach of trust to even think about looking. But that urge, the nagging thought, wouldn't go away. I waited until she went to the bathroom, glancing nervously at Ethan, who was upstairs by now. With my heart racing, I reached for her phone and unlocked it, surprised it didn't have a new passcode. Nothing in the messages seemed suspicious at first, until I saw the one thread that was saved under a single initial. E. I opened it. There were a handful of messages between Jenny and E. At first glance, they seemed harmless, but as I scrolled up, my heart sank. Messages like, "Last night was fun. Can't wait for next time. Or another from Jenny. We have to be careful, Ethan knows. My mind spun. Ethan knew? Knew what? I kept scrolling, but just then I heard the bathroom door open, and I nearly dropped the phone. I put it back just in time, forcing myself to look casual as Jenny walked in, her expression unreadable. Everything okay, babe? She asked, glancing at her phone like she was worried I'd seen something. Or maybe I was just imagining that look in her eyes. Yeah, I replied, feeling my stomach twist. Fine. But I wasn't fine. That night I lay in bed, my mind racing. I could still see the messages, could still hear my coworkers comment about seeing Jenny and Ethan together. I was filled with questions, suspicions, and a growing sense of dread that wouldn't let go. As I stared into the darkness, I made a quiet promise to myself. I was going to find out exactly what was going on, whatever it took. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose, though it felt strange, almost foreign. I was determined to find out what was going on, but I was also haunted by what I'd seen. My mind ran in circles, trying to find a rational explanation. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions, making assumptions about harmless messages. But the line, "We have to be careful, Ethan knows," echoed in my mind, making it impossible to ignore. At breakfast, Jenny was cheerful, maybe even more so than usual. It only made me feel more suspicious. She acted like everything was fine, too fine, as if she were overcompensating. I watched her closely, noting every little smile, every glance she shot at Ethan. He barely made eye contact with me, looking down at his phone or into his cereal bowl. I felt like an outsider in my own family. On my way out, I decided to do something I'd never done before. As I was gathering my keys and wallet, I casually slipped into Jenny's purse and picked up her car keys. Then I clipped a small GPS tracker onto her keyring. It was a device I'd used a few times when my company wanted to track mileage for work trips. If she noticed it, I'd just say it was for work, that I'd forgotten to remove it. After work that day, I opened the tracking app on my phone and set it to alert me whenever she went out. I felt a pang of guilt, but the gnawing need to know what was going on overshadowed it. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, I could barely look at her. I'd been obsessing over the messages all day, but I'd also been rehearsing what I might say to her. But every time I thought about confronting her, I'd chicken out. What if I was wrong? What if this was all a giant misunderstanding? Everything okay, Tom? Jenny asked, her voice laced with concern as she passed me the salad bowl. Yeah, I replied, forcing a smile. Just tired. Ethan gave me a strange look, something between pity and satisfaction, as if he knew I was onto something but didn't care. It was such an odd, unsettling feeling that I nearly dropped my fork. But when I glanced at him, his expression had gone blank, like he hadn't even noticed me. After dinner, Jenny announced that she was going to bed early. She kissed me goodnight and headed upstairs, but I knew she was probably just locking herself away to text. As for Ethan, he lingered in the living room, watching TV with an indifferent expression. The evening dragged on, and after a couple of hours I heard my phone buzz, a notification from the tracker app. Movement detected. I checked the app, and sure enough, Jenny's car was on the move. I quickly grabbed my coat and left, saying a hasty goodbye to Ethan. He barely looked up from the TV, not seeming to care where I was going. As I followed the small red dot on my screen, I felt a strange calm wash over me. I was determined to know the truth, whatever it turned out to be. The app led me across town, past the familiar roads, and eventually to the dimly lit parking lot of a small cafe. Jenny's car was there, parked near the entrance. From my own car, I watched as Jenny got out, glancing around nervously. She didn't look like she was meeting a friend. She looked like she was waiting for someone. My heart raced as I saw a familiar figure step out of the cafe's side door. It was Ethan. He walked toward her, and they embraced, not like family, but like something else. It made my stomach twist. They stood there, talking in low voices, close enough that I couldn't tell if they were just whispering or if there was something more intimate in the way they held each other. After a few minutes, Jenny gestured toward her car, and they both climbed in. The lights stayed off, and the car didn't move. I watched as shadows moved in the car, my mind racing through 1,000 terrible possibilities. I wanted to rush over, to pull them out and demand answers, but I couldn't make myself move. I just sat there, frozen with horror and confusion. They were inside the car for nearly 30 minutes. When they finally got out, Jenny looked around, checking her surroundings like she was afraid of being seen. Ethan looked relaxed, even smug. They parted ways without a word, each walking in opposite directions, Jenny to her car, Ethan back toward the cafe. I waited until they'd both driven away before I made my move. I pulled into the same parking spot Jenny had used and took a deep breath. My mind was spinning, and my heart felt like it was about to explode. I couldn't believe what I'd just seen. I needed proof, something concrete to confront Jenny with, but more than that, I needed to understand what was going on. The next day, I tried to confront Ethan. I cornered him in the kitchen when Jenny wasn't home. He was making himself a snack, his face blank and indifferent, as if nothing unusual had happened the night before. "Hey, Ethan," I said, my voice steady. "I saw you out last night." He didn't flinch. He looked up, meeting my gaze without a trace of guilt. "Yeah? So?" he replied coolly, raising an eyebrow. I fought to keep my tone calm. "What were you doing out with Jenny?" "Talking," he said, shrugging. "Just talking." The way he said it made my skin crawl, like he knew I was bothered and was enjoying it. I wanted to ask him more, to demand an explanation, but something about his confidence threw me off. He wasn't scared, wasn't worried at all. "Why are you acting like this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Like what?" He smirked, looking me up and down like I was a stranger. "You're the one being weird. Maybe you're just insecure, Tom. Maybe you're just looking for problems that don't exist." I felt a surge of anger. "Don't play games with me, Ethan. I know something's going on." He laughed, a low, mocking sound that made my blood boil. "Look, man. You're not my dad. You never will be. And maybe if you weren't so clueless, you'd understand what's really going on." With that, he pushed past me, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen, seething with frustration and confusion. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind ran through everything Ethan had said. The way he looked at me, the confidence in his voice, it all felt wrong. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation, trying to decipher his words, trying to understand the twisted dynamic that seemed to have formed between Jenny and Ethan. Around midnight I got up, unable to take the silence any longer. I walked through the dark house, ending up in the living room, where I sank onto the couch, staring into the darkness. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, that maybe I was just imagining things. But the memory of that meeting in the cafe, the way they'd looked at each other, it felt real. Too real. I knew then that I had no choice. I had to dig deeper, had to find out the truth no matter what it cost me. It wasn't just about my marriage anymore. It was about my sanity, my sense of reality. I couldn't live with the doubt gnawing away at me, eating me alive from the inside. So I made a decision. The next day, I'd confront Jenny. I'd demand answers, and I wouldn't back down until I had them. I had to know, once and for all, whether my life was truly unraveling, or if I'd somehow misunderstood everything. As I sat there, staring into the shadows, I felt a chill run down my spine. It was as if something dark was creeping into my home, into my life, twisting everything I thought I knew into something unrecognizable. And I knew that whatever came next, it was only going to get worse. The next morning, I woke with a sense of dread hanging over me, like a weight pressing on my chest. Today, I would finally confront Jenny. I told myself it was the right thing to do, that I needed answers, but the thought made my stomach churn. What if I was wrong? What if I was about to shatter our life over a misunderstanding? But then I remembered the sight of them together in the cafe parking lot. I could still see Jenny's guarded, nervous glances, the way Ethan looked so comfortable, almost smug. Those memories hardened my resolve. I needed the truth. At breakfast, I tried to keep things normal, though it felt impossible. Jenny was smiling as usual, asking me if I had any plans for the weekend. Ethan barely looked up from his phone. They both seemed so calm, so normal. It was enough to make me question my sanity. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. As Jenny cleared the dishes, I followed her into the kitchen, my heart pounding. I waited until Ethan left the room, heading upstairs to his bedroom. "Jenny," I began, trying to steady my voice. "Can we talk?" She glanced up, a slight frown creasing her forehead. "Of course, what's up?" Her tone was light, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, nervousness. Annoyance? I couldn't tell. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "I've noticed some things lately. And I can't shake this feeling that there's something you're not telling me." She paused, her hand hovering over the sink. "What are you talking about, Tom?" Her voice was calm, but I could see the tension building in her jaw. I felt my throat tighten. "I saw you and Ethan together. At the cafe. You didn't see me, but I was there." Her face paled, and she turned away, gripping the edge of the counter. "What were you doing there, Tom?" she asked quietly, her voice strained. "Watching," I admitted, feeling a strange satisfaction in her reaction. "Because I had to know what was going on. I had to know why you were sneaking around, why you're always whispering with Ethan." She was silent for a moment, her shoulders tense. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Tom, it's complicated. You wouldn't understand." "Try me," I replied, a surge of anger breaking through. "I think I deserve to know what's going on in my own family." She turned to face me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't place, fear, maybe, or guilt. "Tom, it's not what you think. Ethan and we've just been talking. He's been going through a lot, and he doesn't feel comfortable talking to anyone else." "Talking?" I echoed, my voice dripping with disbelief. "In the car, for half an hour, in the middle of the night?" Her face flushed, and she glanced away, biting her lip. "It's not that simple," she murmured. "Then make it simple," I insisted, feeling my frustration boil over. "Tell me the truth, Jenny. I can't keep living like this, with secrets and lies." For a moment, she looked like she was about to say something, like she was weighing her words. But then, Ethan's footsteps sounded on the stairs, and the moment was broken. She shook her head, her expression hardening. "There's nothing to talk about," she said coldly, her voice barely audible. "You're just imagining things. You need to trust me, Tom." Her words stung. It felt like a slap in the face, like she was brushing off my concerns, my pain, as if they were nothing. She pushed past me, heading toward the door, and I felt a wave of desperation surge through me. That evening, I decided I'd have to try another approach. I couldn't count on Jenny to come clean, not if she was protecting Ethan, or worse, protecting herself. So I shifted my focus to Ethan. I would confront him, get the answers directly. When Jenny left to run errands that night, I found Ethan in his room, scrolling on his phone. I knocked once and walked in without waiting for an invitation. He barely glanced up, clearly annoyed. "What do you want?" he asked, not bothering to hide his irritation. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "About you and your mom." He raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on his lips. "Oh? What's there to talk about?" I felt my fists clench. "I know something's going on, Ethan. I don't know what it is, but I know it's not normal. I saw you together last night. I'm not stupid." For a moment, he looked caught off guard. But then, the smirk returned, and he leaned back against his headboard, folding his arms. "You think you know something? You don't know anything." The arrogance in his voice made my blood boil. "Ethan, I'm warning you. Tell me what's going on between you and Jenny or what?" he interrupted, his tone mocking. "What are you going to do, Tom? You can't stop it. You're just a bystander in all this. A guest." His words stung, cutting deeper than I expected. I'd worked so hard to build a relationship with him, to be a stable figure in his life. And now, He was looking at me like I was a stranger. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice filled with hurt more than anger. "Why are you treating me like this? I've only ever tried to help you, to be here for you." He laughed, a cold, dismissive sound. "Please! You think you're helping? You're just in the way." I felt a wave of anger rise up in me, but I fought to keep it in check. "I'm in the way? Of what, Ethan? Just tell me what's going on." For a moment, his expression softened, and I thought he might actually open up. But then he shrugged, his eyes hardening. "It doesn't matter, Tom. You wouldn't understand. You're too ordinary." Before I could say anything else, he picked up his phone, ignoring me completely, as if the conversation was over. I stood there, feeling a mixture of anger and defeat, unsure of what to do next. I went to bed that night, my mind a whirlwind of anger, hurt, and confusion. I felt like I was living in a nightmare, trapped in a house with two people I barely recognized. The love I'd built, the family I'd cherished, it was crumbling before my eyes, slipping away no matter how hard I tried to hold onto it. The next morning, I checked the GPS app on my phone. Jenny had been leaving the house more frequently, taking longer trips to run errands that seemed to have no real purpose. I felt my heart sink as I watched the red dot move across town. She was going to the same cafe again. I decided to follow her. Maybe if I confronted her there, in the moment, she wouldn't be able to lie her way out of it. I arrived just in time to see Jenny's car pull into the lot. I parked at a distance, watching as she got out and made her way toward the cafe. This time, Ethan wasn't with her. Instead, she met up with a man, a younger man, no older than his mid-20s. He was tall, athletic-looking, and he greeted Jenny with a warm smile. My mind raced as I watched them sit down together, deep in conversation. They looked comfortable, familiar. She was laughing at something he'd said, touching his arm like she'd known him for years. They ordered drinks and sat there, talking and laughing as if they didn't have a care in the world. I felt a sickening twist in my stomach. All this time, I'd thought it was Ethan, that he was somehow responsible for the strange behavior I'd noticed. But now, watching her with this stranger, I realized it was something else entirely. Ethan was probably in on it. Maybe he even knew about this man, this hidden part of Jenny's life. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Jenny had been hiding an entire life from me, a life that included both Ethan and this stranger. And somehow, they'd all managed to keep me in the dark, weaving a web of lies around me while I'd been trying to hold our family together. As I watched them, the weight of the betrayal settled over me, heavy and suffocating. I felt like a fool for not seeing it sooner, for not trusting my instincts. I wanted to burst into the cafe, to demand answers, but I knew I had to play this carefully. I took a few photos of them through the window, capturing the easy smiles, the light touches, the familiarity that shouldn't have been there. Then I got back in my car and drove away, my heart pounding, my mind racing. I knew then that this was just the beginning, that whatever I'd uncovered was just the tip of the iceberg. And as I drove home, I felt a dark determination settle over me. Jenny wasn't going to get away with this. Not anymore. I sat in the driveway for a long time after getting home, my mind racing. I couldn't shake the image of Jenny at the cafe with that stranger, the way she'd laughed, touched his arm, leaned close like they were sharing something secret. All this time, I'd thought it was Ethan, thought he was the one complicating things between us. But now, I saw there was more to her life than she'd ever let me see. By the time I walked inside, I felt strangely calm, like my emotions had settled into something cold and hard. Jenny greeted me with her usual bright smile, acting like nothing was wrong. It made my skin crawl. "Hey, Tom! How was your day?" she asked, her voice light and friendly. "It was fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Pretty standard." I glanced around the house, trying to see things through fresh eyes. There was Ethan, sprawled on the couch, casually scrolling through his phone. He gave me a brief, dismissive nod, not even bothering to pretend he was glad I was home. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Jenny with that man, her laughter, her smile. It was like everything I thought I knew about our life, about her, was slipping away. The next day, I was more determined than ever to get to the truth. I couldn't sit around, waiting to stumble on scraps of information. I needed proof. So, when Jenny mentioned running errands that evening, I decided it was my chance. As soon as she left, I went to her bedroom, my heart pounding. I felt like an intruder, but I pushed past the feeling, determined to find something, anything, that would explain what was going on. I went through her drawers, her closet, nothing. I was starting to feel foolish when I spotted a small box tucked in the back of her closet. Inside, I found a phone I'd never seen before. It was locked, of course, but the sight of it told me everything I needed to know. My hands shook as I placed it back in its hiding spot, feeling the first icy tendrils of realization sink in. This wasn't a one-time fling. This wasn't just her being careless. Jenny was hiding a whole life from me, a life that didn't include me at all. When she returned, I watched her carefully, wondering how much of the woman I'd loved was still there. She acted the same as always, smiling, chatting, pretending everything was normal. But every word, every gesture, felt like an act. She'd created this life in front of me, and I'd never seen through it until now. That night, I resolved to follow her, to see for myself where she went, who she was with. I needed to know what my life had turned into, and why I was being left behind. I didn't know what I'd find, but at that moment, I knew I was done pretending. That evening, I kept my distance, watching as Jenny gathered her things, made the usual excuses about running out for errands. She didn't even look me in the eye as she said goodbye. It was the same script I'd heard a dozen times, but now I knew what to look for, and every word dripped with dishonesty. As soon as her car turned the corner, I grabbed my keys and followed her. I kept several cars behind, trying not to think about the reality of what I might find. It felt like a surreal game, like we were strangers playing out roles we didn't quite fit. Jenny drove across town, past the main streets and through quieter neighborhoods, until she parked in front of a small, unfamiliar house. I pulled over a short distance away, sinking low in my seat. She stepped out of the car, checking her phone as she walked up the path. A moment later, the front door opened, and he was there, the same man from the cafe, waiting for her with a grin. They exchanged a quick kiss, laughing as they walked inside together. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to stay put, to watch every second. This was it, the confirmation I'd been looking for, even if I'd dreaded it. She was living a lie, and I'd just seen the proof with my own eyes. I sat there in the dark, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My mind was a storm of disbelief, anger, and strangest of all, relief. At least now I knew. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't paranoid. Jenny had been lying to me all along. After a while, she emerged from the house, brushing her hair back and glancing around like she was checking for someone. The man leaned in, whispering something that made her laugh before giving her another quick kiss. Then she walked back to her car and drove away, completely unaware that I'd seen everything. Back at home, I waited in the living room, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. When she walked through the door, she didn't notice me right away. She looked startled, though, when she finally did. "Oh, you're still up?" she asked, her voice a little too light. "Yeah," I replied, unable to keep the bitterness out of my tone. "Did you have a good time?" She hesitated, and for a second, I thought she might come clean. But then, she forced a smile, the same fake smile she'd used 1,000 times. "Just errands, like I said. It was nothing." Her eyes flicked away, refusing to meet mine. My fists clenched. The lies, the manipulation, it was all so casual, like it was a script she'd rehearsed to perfection. I wanted to scream, to confront her right there, but a part of me knew it would only drive her further into secrecy. So I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "Good night, Jenny." She glanced at me one last time before heading upstairs, her footsteps soft and careful. And as I sat there alone in the quiet, I knew that things would never go back to the way they were. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I'd loved, was gone. After Jenny went to bed, I stayed up, replaying the scene in my mind, the kiss, the laughs, the way she looked with him. Every detail fueled a bitterness that settled deep in my chest. I knew now that my marriage was a lie, that Jenny had built a separate life I was never part of. It left me feeling hollow and furious at the same time. I could barely look at her the next morning. She acted as though everything was normal, humming in the kitchen, making coffee, asking if I wanted anything. I kept my responses short, watching her carefully for any sign of guilt. But if she felt anything, she hid it well. Ethan walked in, glancing between us with a casual smirk. It was subtle, but it was there, as if he knew exactly what was going on and found it amusing. I felt a wave of anger and wanted to wipe that smug look off his face. It was then that a thought crossed my mind. If Ethan knew about the affair, then maybe he'd seen them together, knew exactly how deep this went. I needed answers, and if Jenny wouldn't give them to me, I'd get them from Ethan. That evening, I waited until Jenny left for another errand, before going up to Ethan's room. I knocked once, then opened the door without waiting for an invitation. He looked up from his phone, an eyebrow raised in mild irritation. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "We need to talk, Ethan," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "I know about your mom. I know about what's going on." He paused, glancing at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Oh? And what exactly do you know, Tom?" I felt my fists clench. "I know about her friend. The man she's been seeing behind my back. I saw them together." He laughed softly, shaking his head. "So you finally figured it out? Good for you. It took you long enough." His words hit me like a slap. He'd known the whole time, and he hadn't cared. If anything, he seemed pleased with the situation. "You think this is funny?" I asked, my voice low and tight. "Watching her destroy everything we built, watching me try to hold this family together while you—" "Family?" he interrupted, sneering. "You're not my family, Tom. You're just a guy who married my mom." The words stung, but I kept my focus. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because it's none of your business," he said coldly. "Whatever's going on between you and my mom is for you to deal with. I don't owe you anything." I stared at him, realizing that any chance of a real relationship with him had vanished. He'd chosen his side, and it wasn't mine. Without another word, I turned and left his room, my heart pounding with anger and betrayal. As I closed the door behind me, I made a decision. I was done trying to understand, done trying to fix things. I went to bed that night, lying awake in the dark, the events of the past few days replaying in my mind. Every word Ethan had said, every lie Jenny had told, every laugh she'd shared with that stranger, all of it was like poison in my thoughts. Tomorrow, I decided, would be different. I'd gather everything I needed, find every piece of proof, and confront Jenny once and for all. No more games, no more secrets. As I lay there, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I knew now that the life I thought I had, the family I'd worked to build, was gone. But I also knew that I was done being played, done being in the dark. Whatever came next, it would be on my terms. And by the end of it, Jenny would finally face the truth. The next morning, I woke early, determined to put my plan into action. Jenny was still asleep, so I quietly gathered the camera footage I'd saved from the living room, the photos I'd taken of her and the man at the cafe, and the notes I'd made of her frequent errands. My heart pounded as I reviewed each piece of evidence, feeling a strange mixture of dread and resolve. Today, there would be no more lies. Jenny came downstairs eventually, wearing that same easy smile as she poured herself coffee. I watched her, taking in every detail, feeling like I was seeing her for the first time, a stranger who had taken over my wife's life. "Good morning," she chirped, as though nothing were wrong. I nodded, not returning her smile. She glanced at me, her expression faltering slightly. "Everything okay, Tom?" she asked, her voice laced with a hint of concern. Or maybe it was caution. "Actually, no," I said, my voice steady. "We need to talk. Now." Her face paled, and she set her coffee down carefully, her eyes darting away as if she could avoid whatever was coming. "Okay," she said slowly, sitting down across from me. "What's this about?" I took a deep breath, then placed the photos on the table between us. Her eyes widened, and she stared at them in silence, her face draining of color. "I followed you, Jenny," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know everything. I've seen you with him." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I watched her, waiting for the excuses, the denials, the desperate explanations. But all she did was look down, her face twisted with guilt. "Tom, I didn't want it to be like this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I never wanted to hurt you." I clenched my fists, the anger bubbling up again. "You didn't want to hurt me?" I repeated, my tone laced with disbelief. "You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around with some guy like I'm nothing, and now you're telling me you didn't want to hurt me?" She covered her face with her hands, taking a shaky breath. "It just happened. I didn't plan for any of this." "Who is he?" I demanded, my voice growing louder. "What is he to you?" She looked up, her expression crumbling. "His name is Mark. He's someone I met through work." I stared at her, trying to process her words. It was all so simple to her, so easy. She just met him through work, just decided that was enough to betray everything we built. "What about Ethan?" I asked, anger simmering under my words. "He knew, didn't he?" She nodded, biting her lip. "I asked him not to say anything. I didn't want him to be dragged into this." "You used him," I accused, my voice cold. "You brought our son into this mess, made him lie for you, made him keep secrets. Do you even understand what you've done?" She lowered her head, her shoulders shaking as tears filled her eyes. But I couldn't feel sympathy. Not anymore. "I want you out," I said, my voice firm. "I don't want to see you here. Pack your things and leave." She looked up, her face streaked with tears. "Tom, please. We can work through this. I know I made a mistake, but I still love you." "No," I cut her off. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You chose him. You chose this life. So go and live it." For a moment she sat there, frozen, before she slowly stood up, wiping her face. Without another word, she turned and walked upstairs. I listened to the sound of her footsteps, feeling the emptiness settle over me like a weight. An hour later she was gone. The silence in the house was heavy, almost suffocating, but I felt an unexpected sense of relief. The lies, the betrayals, they were all out in the open now, and I didn't have to live in the dark anymore. As I sat alone in the quiet house, I realized I'd lost the woman I thought I knew, but in the process, I'd finally found something real. The truth. It wasn't what I'd wanted, but it was enough. For now. The house was eerily quiet after Jenny left, as though the air had thickened with all the words we hadn't said. I sat there in the empty living room, the reality settling over me in waves. The home we built together, the life I thought we shared, it was all just an illusion. And now it was gone. I spent the next few hours in a kind of trance, moving through the house, gathering her things to drop them off later. I found a stack of her personal items tucked away in the closet, a few old photos, some keepsakes, things that, in retrospect, felt like remnants of a life I'd never truly known. Ethan came downstairs eventually, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the quiet house, the absence of his mother. He gave me a defiant look, his arms crossed over his chest. "So it's over?" he asked, his tone sharp and accusatory. "You threw her out?" I met his gaze, feeling a mixture of anger and disappointment. "She left Ethan. Because of choices she made. And you knew. You knew all along, and you said nothing." He rolled his eyes, a bitter smirk on his face. "Why would I say anything to you? It's not like you'd understand." I took a deep breath, trying to hold back the surge of frustration. "You're right. I don't understand. I don't understand how you could stand by and watch everything fall apart. I was here for you, Ethan. I tried to make this work for you too." He looked away, the defiance faltering slightly. She was the only one who ever really cared about me. I didn't ask for you to come in and pretend like we were a family. The words hit hard, sharper than I expected. I wasn't pretending, Ethan. I wanted to be a father to you. Yeah? Well, maybe I didn't need one. His voice was cold, dismissive, as though he couldn't care less. For a long moment, we just stood there, the silence stretching painfully between us. Finally, he turned and walked away, disappearing upstairs without another word. I let him go, feeling the weight of defeat settle in. I'd lost them both, and maybe I'd never really had either of them to begin with. The days that followed were a blur. I went through the motions of life, throwing myself into work, into anything that would keep my mind off the emptiness in the house. I tried not to think about Jenny, about where she might be or if she was with him. But sometimes, the loneliness crept in, filling the rooms with memories I didn't want to revisit. Ethan stayed in his room most of the time, avoiding me, barely acknowledging my presence. The few times we did cross paths, he acted as though I were a stranger, a minor inconvenience in his life. The hostility in his eyes was unmistakable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he blamed me for everything, that he saw me as the enemy. One evening, as I was finishing up some work at the kitchen table, Ethan finally spoke. She called me, he said, his voice guarded. I looked up, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. Jenny? Yeah. She wants me to stay with her for a while. At Mark's place. I felt a surge of anger at the mention of his name, but I kept my voice calm. And what do you want, Ethan? He shrugged, his expression hard. I don't know. At least she's honest with me. I felt my patience snap. Honest? She's been lying to both of us, Ethan. She dragged you into this, made you lie for her, made you keep secrets. And you think that's honesty? His face flushed, but he held his ground. At least she didn't pretend to be something she's not. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. There was no point. He'd already made up his mind, already decided that his loyalty lay with her, with their shared secrets and lies. If that's what you want, I won't stop you, I said finally, the resignation settling over me. But just know that whatever happens, I was here for you. I always tried to be here for you. He looked away, refusing to meet my gaze. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving me alone once again. The next morning, he packed his things, barely speaking a word to me as he gathered his belongings. I watched him go, feeling a strange sense of finality as he walked out the door, leaving me in the empty house. I stood by the window, watching as he got into a car that wasn't mine, a car driven by Jenny. She barely glanced at the house, her expression unreadable as she pulled away, taking Ethan with her. And just like that, they were gone. The family I tried so hard to hold on to had slipped away, leaving nothing but a hollow silence in their wake. As I closed the door, I realized I was truly alone. It was a bitter truth, but it was mine now. The days after Jenny and Ethan left were unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Long stretches of silence, of empty rooms and routines that seemed pointless without them. The house was like a shell, filled only with memories that felt more like ghosts, remnants of a life that had vanished almost overnight. I thought about what I'd lost, about the pieces of myself I'd given up to try to make this family work. And now, with Jenny and Ethan gone, I was left to question if any of it had been real. One afternoon, my best friend Kyle dropped by. He was the only one I'd confided in since everything had fallen apart, and his presence was a small comfort, a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone. So you've really just let them go? He asked as he sat down, looking at me with a mixture of sympathy and confusion. I shrugged, staring into my coffee cup. What else could I do? I can't make them stay, and I can't make them care. They made their choice. Kyle frowned, leaning forward. But Tom, are you sure you're okay with just letting this slide? I mean, they used you. All that time, Jenny was lying, and Ethan, he was just watching, not saying a word. His words hit harder than I wanted to admit. I'd spent so much time trying to process everything on my own, but hearing it from someone else made it real, undeniable. They hadn't just left, they'd taken advantage of me, betrayed the life I thought we'd shared. I took a deep breath, trying to keep the anger at bay. I don't know if I'm okay with it, but what choice do I have? I'm done fighting for people who don't want me. Kyle was silent for a moment, then he nodded, his expression thoughtful. Maybe it's time to stop looking at this as a loss and start seeing it as a chance to rebuild. To focus on what you want. I forced a weak smile, though his words lingered in my mind. Rebuilding seemed impossible when every memory in this house was tied to them. But maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to let go of what had been and start focusing on what could be. The following week, I took the first step. I packed up the remnants of Jenny's things that I'd missed before, loading them into boxes and storing them in the garage. Every item felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders, a piece of the past I could finally let go. I went through the photos, the reminders of the family we'd once tried to be, and carefully set them aside. The walls felt emptier, but somehow, it felt like I could breathe a little easier. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, I started to find a new rhythm. I went back to work, spent more time with friends, even picked up a few hobbies I'd neglected over the years. The emptiness was still there, but it wasn't as suffocating. I was learning, piece by piece, how to live with it. But one evening, just as I was starting to think I could move on, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Tom, please talk to me. I need to explain. Jenny. My hand tightened around the phone, the familiar anger bubbling up. After everything she'd done, she wanted to explain? Part of me wanted to ignore it, to delete the message and let her live with her choices. But a deeper part, one that still needed closure, couldn't resist. I texted back a curt, "What is there to explain?" and waited. Her response came almost immediately. "Can we meet? I know I hurt you, but you don't know the whole story." I stared at the screen, torn. There was nothing she could say that would undo the betrayal, nothing that could erase the damage she'd caused. But a part of me, the part that still felt haunted by her, wanted to hear her out. After a long pause, I replied, "Fine. Tomorrow at 7. The coffee shop by the park." When I arrived at the coffee shop the next evening, Jenny was already there, sitting by the window, her face pale and drawn. She looked different, older somehow, like the weight of her choices had finally started to catch up with her. "Tom," she said softly as I sat down across from her. Her voice was filled with something I hadn't heard in a long time, genuine regret. I didn't respond, just waited, keeping my expression unreadable. She took a shaky breath, clasping her hands together on the table. "I don't know where to start," she said, her voice trembling. "But I know I need to try. I owe you that much." I stared at her, feeling the anger simmer just below the surface. "You owe me the truth, Jenny. That's all I want." She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I was lost, Tom. I thought I could find something better, something more exciting. I let that blind me. I let Ethan's anger at the situation fuel my own." Her words hit hard, but I kept my expression steady. "So you just threw everything away? For what, Jenny? For a thrill?" Her shoulders slumped, and she looked away. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought I could keep both lives separate, that I could have it all." I felt a bitter laugh escape me. "So I was just part of the act?" "No," she whispered, her face streaked with tears. "You were everything, Tom. And I ruined it. I know I can't fix it, but I need you to know that." We sat in silence, her confession hanging in the air like a weight. I felt the finality of it settle over me, a strange mixture of closure and emptiness. "I don't know what you expected me to say, Jenny," I said finally. "You chose to leave. And I choose to let you go." She looked up, her expression pained, but she nodded, accepting the truth. There was nothing left to say. As I stood to leave, a sense of peace washed over me. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined, but it was an ending nonetheless. I left Jenny there, a figure from a life I no longer belonged to, and walked out into the night, ready to start a life of my own. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Days passed after that final meeting with Jenny, each one feeling a little lighter, a little more my own. The weight of betrayal had lifted, replaced by a strange sense of calm that I hadn't felt in years. I'd finally let go, and with that release came the chance to rebuild. Then, one evening, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it but, on a whim, decided to answer. "Hello?" I said, expecting silence or a telemarketer. Instead, I was greeted by the hesitant voice of a young man. "Tom?" he asked, his tone uncertain. "Yes, this is Tom. Who's calling?" The line crackled, and there was a brief pause before he spoke again. "It's Mark. Well, I know I shouldn't be calling, but I thought you might want to hear this from me." The name hit me like a jolt. Mark. The man Jenny had left me for. The one I'd seen her with in cafes, in secret meetings, in all the places where I hadn't belonged. My grip tightened on the phone, but I kept my voice steady. "What could you possibly have to say to me?" I asked, every word laced with a tension I could barely hold back. I know it's strange for me to call, and you have every reason to hate me." He started, his voice shaking slightly. "But I wanted you to know that it's over between me and Jenny." The words caught me off guard. I'd expected apologies or excuses, but it was almost surreal. "Oh?" I replied, keeping my tone cold. "Why tell me this? Why would I care?" He took a shaky breath, and I could almost picture him, nervous, possibly ashamed. "Because I don't think you know the full truth. Jenny, she wasn't honest with you. Or with me." I frowned, feeling a surge of curiosity despite myself. "What are you talking about? Jenny didn't just leave you for me. She left because she thought she could use me, use what I had, who I knew. She saw an opportunity and I was stupid enough to fall for it." There was a long silence, and I felt the anger bubbling up, but I held it back. "What does that mean, exactly? What did she use you for?" Mark hesitated, then sighed. "Jenny thought I could help her career, that I could introduce her to people who would open doors for her. She never told me she was married at first. I didn't know anything about you or Ethan until I was already involved. When I found out, I was furious, but by then, she'd convinced me I was the one she wanted, that I was the one who understood her." I laughed bitterly, the irony almost too much to bear. "So, she manipulated both of us?" "Yeah," he admitted, his voice low. "I fell for it. She played us both, Tom. I thought I was different, that she really cared about me. But in the end, I was just another pawn in her game." There was a long pause, and I took a deep breath, feeling the last pieces of the puzzle click into place. Jenny's charm, her duplicity, it was her talent, her skill, and she'd used it on everyone, not just me. "So why call me now?" I asked, not sure what I expected him to say. "Because you deserve to know the truth," he replied, his tone filled with genuine regret. "And because I'm sorry. For what it's worth." For a moment, I felt a strange sense of pity for him, realizing that he, too, had been a casualty in Jenny's world. We'd both fallen for her lies, both let her twist our lives into something unrecognizable. "I appreciate the call, Mark," I said finally, meaning it more than I'd expected. "But I'm moving on. I suggest you do the same." He exhaled, relief evident in his tone. "Thank you, Tom. Take care." I hung up, feeling an odd sense of closure. The entire ordeal, the tangled mess of betrayal and lies, it all seemed so clear now. Jenny's betrayal hadn't just been about her and Mark, or even her and Ethan. It was part of a larger pattern, one I'd been blind to for too long. That evening, I sat alone in the quiet house, feeling a strange peace settle over me. The anger, the hurt, they were still there, but they felt smaller now, more manageable. I was free from Jenny's web of lies, free from the illusion of the life I'd thought we shared. In the days that followed, I focused on rebuilding, taking back pieces of myself that I'd lost along the way. I redecorated the house, clearing out the last of Jenny's things, transforming each room into a space that felt like my own. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living in a home, not a house haunted by memories and regret. Friends and family drifted back into my life, people I'd pushed away during the turmoil of my marriage. And with each new connection, each shared laugh, I found pieces of the person I'd once been, someone I thought I'd lost forever. One day, while I was cleaning out a drawer in the garage, I found an old photo of Jenny and Ethan, taken during a summer trip we'd taken years ago. I stared at it for a long moment, feeling the echoes of a life that had ended so abruptly. But instead of anger or sadness, I felt only acceptance. I placed the photo back in the drawer, ready to move on from the past, ready to build a new life on my own terms. Whatever came next, I knew I would face it as a man who'd learned, who'd healed, and who was finally free from the shadows of betrayal. And as I closed the drawer, I felt a sense of calm, a quiet certainty that my life was my own again, unburdened, at last, by the ghosts of the past. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, hit like and leave a comment with your favorite part. We'd love to hear your perspective.